All right, welcome back to New Testament Survey as we continue on our discussion of the religious and philosophical setting of the first century of the times of the Gospels. I want to talk a little bit about the political institutions or the Jewish institutions that popped up in the first century that are significant to our study of the New Testament. And we've got three things we're going to talk about: the Sanhedrin, the synagogue, and the temple. First, let's talk a little bit about this, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a group of 72 elders that were established in the city of Jerusalem and were a recognized political body that basically ruled Judea and ruled the city of Jerusalem, and they were a religious council, as it were. This group is sometimes in the New Testament simply called the council. So we run into them in the Gospels. We run into them even in the book of Acts. This group of the Sanhedrin were a really politically elite group. You really had to know someone in order to become a member of this group. You really had to jump through a lot of hoops in order to become a member of this group. We see several individuals that are members of this group in the New Testament. We see Nicodemus in the Gospels. Joseph of Arimathea very likely was a member of the Sanhedrin. We see Gamaliel in both the Gospel of John and the book of Acts. We see Gamaliel, one of the leaders of the synagogue itself. Of course, the chief priests, Caiaphas and Annas, and all of those were also a part of the Sanhedrin. And this group of 70 elders was made up of both Sadducees and Pharisees. So think perhaps maybe like the modern day Senate, where you have 100 senators, 2 from each state, that could either be Democrat or Republican. Now, in our U.S. system, whoever has the majority in the Senate has all of the leadership in the Senate. The Senate Majority Leader, the heads of all of the various Senate committees then are appointed by the majority party. However, in the Sanhedrin, it worked kind of the opposite of that. The Pharisees held most of the seats in the Sanhedrin because they had such political sway with the people, but the Sadducees actually had the leadership because they held the high priesthood, and they held the sway with Rome. And so Rome came in and appointed Sadducees as leaders, the chief priests as leaders in the Sanhedrin. It's very well thought. It's thought that Paul himself was either a member of the Sanhedrin, or more likely he was on his way to becoming a member of the Sanhedrin. And it's very likely because the way he's described in the book of Acts, in chapter 7, when Stephen is stoned, he's described as a young man who all of those who are going to stone Stephen cast their cloaks at his feet, perhaps because he was some kind of a page, or perhaps some kind of apprentice to. We know that he studied under Gamaliel. Very likely that he could have been there as he would have been in position to become a member of the Sanhedrin. And again, we come across several others: Nicodemus, and I believe Joseph of Arimathea as well, as members of this group of 70 elders in the city of Jerusalem. The next group that we talk about, or next institution we talk about, is the synagogue. The synagogue was a concept that came about in the intertestamental period during what's called the dispersion or the diaspora. The dispersion refers to not after the Jewish exile, after the 70 years of exile in Babylon, there were 3 returns that were led by Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah. After those returns, not every Jewish person returned to the city of Jerusalem or returned to Judea. Instead, they were dispersed throughout the whole world. There were Jews living in Alexandria, Egypt. There were, in fact, quite a few Jews living in Alexandria, Egypt. They're the ones who give us the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which we talked about last week. There's also a significant number of Jews living still in Babylon and Persia. There's still a significant number of Jews living in Rome itself and other Greek cities. And we see this because we see synagogues all throughout the New Testament, and we see archaeology has found synagogues throughout the Roman world at that time. And basically what the synagogue was the word itself is Greek for gathering place. And each town, each locality, if there was a group of 10 Jewish men, that was the kind of the watermark. If a town had 10 Jewish men, they could form a synagogue, a gathering place. And this gathering place would be where they would go and learn of the Old Testament scriptures, the Jewish scriptures. It would be where a rabbi would set himself up as a teacher, and they would go every Sabbath. They would then come and worship there. It's here in these synagogues that that really an order of worship was established, of the reading of Scripture, the taking up of an offering, the homily or the explanation or exposition of Scripture, the singing of hymns and psalms took place. And you can see just even the format of the hall itself, where seats would be set up on the sides and in the middle, and in the very front would be what's called the scriptorium, where they would keep the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and the rabbi would take them out, place them on a podium, and then teach from there. And you can really see how our modern day churches are very much patterned after, and have been for 2,000 years, patterned after synagogue worship throughout the world that had taken place. And you really do see the Jewish roots to Christianity in the synagogue. It's to the synagogue that Jesus goes. It's where Jesus reads the scriptures, where he says, these words have been fulfilled in your hearing. It's the synagogue where Paul goes to in every town that he goes into and preaches the gospel to begin with. And in just about every synagogue, Christianity is rejected. So that's the synagogue. Let's move on then to perhaps the most significant of the institutions that was around in the times of the New Testament, and that was the temple itself. The temple, originally built by Solomon in around 960, 971 BC, was destroyed in 586 BC by Babylon. After 70 years, in 516, under the direction of Ezra and Haggai and Zechariah and the high priest Joshua, the temple was reconstructed, and under Zerubbabel as well, was reconstructed, but it paled in comparison. According to the book of Zechariah, paled in comparison. It was a shadow of Solomon's temple. There were people who were alive at the time to have remembered Solomon's temple in all its glory from 70 years previous. And they remarked how it was a shadow of its former glory. Well, over the years, from that point on, from 516 until the 1st century, it operated in that capacity until Herod the Great came along, and in 14 BC he began to refurbish the. Starting in 37 BC, he began to refurbish the temple, and it took him a number of years to be able to finish and complete the New Testament, the temple. In fact, from that point all the way through the Gospels, pretty much right up until Jesus arrives in Jerusalem to cleanse the temple for the very first time, even the time when he goes when he's a boy, the temple was under constant construction. Which is why when Jesus says to the crowd, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it back up, of course talking about his body, the Pharisees are all up in arms. Actually, it's the Sadducees all up in arms. It took 20 years to build this temple, and you say you're going to destroy it in 3 days. Or rebuild it in 3 days. They're outraged that he's talking about destroying this temple that had taken so long to finally bring to its to some form of its former glory again. And so it was a massive area, as you can see in this picture that renders kind of the size of the temple court area. This was no small place. So when we talk about going to the temple, there were lots and lots of people that could fit in this temple and the temple precincts and these various buildings that surrounded the temple itself. And as you can see here, where they would go, and if you can see around the edge of the temple courtyard were stalls or porches where they would go and rabbis would teach. And that's, of course, where the first Christians there in Acts chapter 2 and following, where they would go and teach from Solomon's porch, one of the various porticos, one of the various stalls that's around surrounding the courtyard there. To the far northwest corner, you can see a tall building there. That's the Antonia Fortress. That was a fortress that was built by Rome as an addition to the temple, so that Rome could place a garrison there to protect the temple and all those there. Really, it was to suppress any form of uprising or insurrection that would take place in the temple. If you can imagine, during the Feast of Passover and the other feasts where all the Jewish men were to come to the temple, this place would be flooded with people. Sometimes upwards of 1 million or even 2 million people would flood into the city of Jerusalem and be here in this temple area. So you can tell it would be a very important thing to be able to keep some law and order, especially if this group of people with a messianic fervor would decide that they want to uprise. So that's our study of the various Jewish political groups that arose in the intertestamental period and were significant to the Gospels and the first century.